Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chiavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dime Sportsbook. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC on Fox 21 event, which takes place in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC 202 went 0-3 to lose 7.6 units overall. We lost all three of our plays on Nate Diaz, Rick Story, and Randa Marcos, but we did win our 1-unit free bet on Artem Lobov. Back to the present, UFC on Fox 21 features an 11-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass and Big Network Fox this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now kicking off the preliminary card on Fight Pass is a lightweight contest between UFC newcomers Jeremy Kennedy, who is 8-0, against Alexandro Ricci, who is 10-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Kennedy minus 185 to come back on Ricci at plus 145. Looking over our sponsored sportsbook, 5dimes.eu, it's currently Kennedy minus 155. The comeback on Ricci is at plus 135. Pretty good fight. I mean, you have two Canadian MMA prospects. I mean, I know Ricci's kind of on the older side of that, so I'm not sure if you consider him a true prospect at age 34, but as far as ability and finally getting his shot in the UFC, I'm glad to see the guy make it. He's been around for a little while and accomplishing some pretty good things on the Canadian MMA scene. Ricci's definitely a talented fighter, so glad they gave him the last minute short notice replacement call. He deserves to be in here against now a true prospect in what I consider as far as Kennedy goes. I mean, Kennedy is definitely, he's got a lot of hype around, you know, especially in the Canadian community. I mean, the MMA community, he definitely has a lot of respect from the fans out there, and it's for a good reason. The guy's definitely an exciting fighter to watch. Of course, all lines, by the way, are courtesy of our sponsored sportsbook, 5dimes.eu, so make sure you guys check those out. But early on, the public has been betting Ricci a little bit more. Coming in, they believe that he's kind of the savvy vet. He's really kind of a big guy or a powerful guy at 155 as well. And Kennedy really should be fighting at 145 pounds. That's really what he usually fights at. So he's moving up in weight at 155. So I think people are expecting competitive fight and the dog action coming on Ricci because, again, he's got that experience over solid competition even outside the UFC. And he's going to be a little bit physically stronger. At least a lot of people, that's what they think is going to happen here. But getting into the actual matchup. Now, we should say a lot of these prospects and a lot of the Canadians that have made this card, there's not a ton of film and footage out there. So you got to really dig deep to do your research in this fight. And I also urge you to make sure you guys check out one of our very own James Lynch from MMAoddsbreaker.com and the Party Shot podcast has a ton of good interviews with these guys, a lot of the prospects, not just Ricci and Kennedy, but also James and Hunter and a bunch of other guys that are debuting here. They cover the Canadian side of MMA very well. And he's got, again, from the Parting Shot podcast to the interviews that he's done with these guys. I urge you guys to check those out because he's done a great job with those. And they do help. I mean, get you a better feel for what's going on and what their opinion is on this because they're very knowledgeable, to say the least. But getting into this matchup, again, Kennedy is basically a pretty well-rounded fighter. I mean, he's got it everything. He's got long, rangy, clean technique with his striking. He's got pretty good boxing and kickboxing game to go along with it. Good clinch game. He attacks with knees well. Very accurate in his striking. He's also got some solid takedowns and impressive balance in takedown defense. I mean, if you watch a little bit of his takedown defense, I mean, it's kind of a head scratcher. He's able to, he looks like he's in some bad spots, but he's able to keep the fight upright. And even if he does get put on his back, the guy attacks and scrambles out of position and he looks for those subs. So Kennedy is a very complete fighter. And even offensively wrestling, I mean, he's pretty good there as well. He can get the takedowns, capable of getting some body lock trip takedowns as well, and has solid BJJ. So Kennedy is a legit prospect. He's only 23 years old. The guy's going to continue to improve. He spent some time in this camp training with Shane Campbell. It was only a few days, but I think physically, obviously, we all know Campbell's a very strong lightweight, and I think that's going to benefit Kennedy. I mean, supposedly, according to him, The strength wasn't very overwhelming. The strength difference by moving up and training with a guy like Campbell, I mean, he wasn't overwhelmed by Campbell's power. So I think against Ricci, I don't think he's going to have an issue with that as well. Not as much as everybody thinks, at least. But getting into Ricci real quick, I mean, another well-rounded guy. Definitely, as I mentioned, he's got a respectable resume outside of the UFC. He is known for his striking, but he does have some wrestlings to go along with it. He's got some subs as well. And so he's a very clean technical fighter that does seem to push a pace, has a little bit of power on the feet, and also has some subs to go along with it. I mean, he hasn't won officially any fights by sub, but he does have a sub game, so you got to look beyond that a little bit. And he does have some wrestling to go along with it as well. So he has that type of striking on the feet that shows you some pretty clean, precise striking, good movement as well. There's a lot of good things to like about Ricci, and I do think that he's going to test Kennedy in this spot. I just trust Kennedy a little bit more. I think he's going to be the one landing the cleaner shots. I trust Kennedy's chin a little bit more as well. I know Ricci has been rocked in the past. He survived it, though. I mean, you got to give Ricci credit. He's the type of guy that even if he gets rocked, he seems to recover fairly quickly. But I think Kennedy can outpoint Ricci. I think Kennedy, if there's going to be a finish in this fight, it's probably Kennedy maybe getting the finish over Ricci if that happens as well. Ricci coming in on short notice. I should mention that he did have a fight lined up in Japan, I believe, about a month later. So it's not like he's been totally out of camp for this fight, but it is early for him. So with everything lining up, I really do lean a little bit more towards Kennedy here. Again, I'm expecting a pretty competitive fight, but I think Kennedy, the prospect, the hype around him that everybody's talking about is legit. And I think this guy is going to be a force, especially after this fight when he drops to his regular division at 145. I think there's a lot of good things to like about Kennedy. So I'm going to pick him to win this fight. I think that he might win on the scorecards or even win inside. There's just more ways for him to win. I think he's going to get it done.
And I'll completely second your credit of James Lynch. He did some amazing interviews with these guys, and he's been actually interviewing these guys for years, even before their UFC debuts. So if you want to get a hot take on them, definitely check them out. Now, with Jeremy Kennedy and Alessandro Ricci, realistically, Kennedy is just so much more well-rounded than Ricci. The one thing Kennedy does not have going for him is primarily he's been a featherweight throughout his career. So heading in there against Ricci, Kennedy actually is going to be an inch taller, but Ricci should be stronger. So maybe that could help Ricci in terms of fending off takedowns, because Ricci is going to be the more technical striker, but Kennedy does have some good pop. Ricci likes to circle on the outside, land counters, and, just kind of work and look for openings on his opponent as his opponent kind of stalks him down. And Kennedy is definitely more aggressive. Kennedy has good kicks, good power in his hands, and then if he gets to the ground, he is a bit of a wizard on the canvas. Great scrambles, very good at passing guard, excellent submission game. So, I mean, if Kennedy is really serious about making a great first impression in the UFC, I think he looks to take this fight to the floor. Because otherwise he is playing a little bit with fire against Ricci, because Ricci does have a solid striking base, some good Muay Thai kickboxing ability, and the fight is a much more even if it stays standing. That being said, Ricci, he's got the ability to do damage, maybe open up cuts, but he doesn't have a lot of knockout power. I mean, almost all of his wins are by decision, even though they stay standing. So I'm not too concerned about Kennedy getting hurt, and maybe he wants to just get in Ricci's face and really turn this into a bit of a firefight, because he's not too concerned about getting hurt. So I definitely do think this is Jeremy Kennedy's fight to lose. I mean, they were initially planning to pair him up against Team Alpha Male fighter Josh Emmett, who looked really good in his UFC debut and was also undefeated. So I think UFC has high hopes for Jeremy Kennedy, and even though Ricci was training to fight in September in Japan, so even though he was in training camp, I still think that, the short notice is going to have an effect, because he was training to fight almost 3-4 weeks later. And I think the bright lights of the UFC a little bit are going to affect him a little bit more. So my pick's going to be Jeremy Kennedy. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Ryan James, who is 8-1, taking on Adam Hunter, who is 7-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I open Hunter minus 190, the comeback on James at plus 150. Another spot where you can definitely check out the interviews from James Lynch here on this fight. Currently, we have Hunter at minus 160, and James is plus 140 at 5 times. So a little bit more action coming in on James as a dog, 10-cent drop, but they're going to continue to get probably two-way action on this fight because what you have here is a pretty interesting matchup. I mean, it's a throwback fight kind of because Hunter is your striker and James is your grappler. So they're both going to look to utilize what they do best. So whoever stylistically is able to do that effectively is going to probably win this fight. I guess I'll start off with James first. I mean, he's been out since July of 2015. He's coming back from some injuries, so it's not like, he was off for a reason, really. He's trying to heal up a little bit. He trains with Sarah Kaufman and crew, in Canada, of course. So, he's training with a decent amount of training partners and decent camp over there. Now, there is, again, limited footage on these guys a little bit, so you got to dig deep and try to research and do as best you can with this fight. But overall, James is a ground specialist. He does have some decent boxing from what I've seen. I mean, it's not awful for a ground guy. He could be effective. He's got a good clinch game to go along with it as well. So he's not bad on the feet, but he definitely does specialize on the ground, and he wants to get this fight to the ground. His takedown game is more of a body lock style, like those trips that he likes to get to the floor. So his wrestling's not bad, but he's not really the type that from what I've seen again, that shoots in for double legs. It's more of getting inside and getting that clinch and getting that body lock and taking you down. My concern with James is his strike defense. It's okay, but he does get clipped a little bit too often. I mean, his chin seems to hold up. He does get rocked a little bit, but he recovers fairly quickly, so you got to give him credit. But against a guy like Hunter, James cannot afford to get clipped too many times because Hunter has nasty power. And then I'll swing over to him real quick. I mean, Hunter's another one of these guys that's kind of an older prospect as well, but he's a striker. I mean, he's the type of guy that has bricks in his hands. I mean, it seems like his fists are so heavy that he just barely has to touch you at times and you just go down and crumble. I mean, that's the kind of power Hunter has. Now, he's an aggressive brawler kind of, so he's not the most technical fighter at times, but he does utilize a jab well, and his technique, I mean, maybe it's not fair to say he's a sloppy fighter, but at times, again, he looks more like a brawler, but he could be effective in that style. He does have decent takedown defense overall, so he's got some wrestling to go along with it as well. So he can basically sprawl and brawl against most people. And then his ability to finish is, like I just said, it's remarkable because he's got that kind of crazy knockout power and accuracy that he usually gets the job done. So, and if you just look, actually, he's coming off of a very impressive KO win over UFC vet Dempsey, and that was just recently here in 2016. And he's won his, 6 last fights have been, by KO, TKO. So he's on a roll here, knocking everybody out. And even though Dempsey, I know he's not going to get a lot of love from the UFC fans or the diehards. A lot of people don't think he's a quality fighter. It's still, I mean, putting a guy out that quickly that's going to probably look to take you down. I mean, that's exactly what James is going to do. He's going to look to take Hunter down. Hunter was able to have some success against Dempsey like that. So not saying he's going to have the same success here against James because I think James is a pretty legit fighter himself, but Hunter's a dangerous guy. So what I think happens in this fight is that Hunter does sprawl and brawl, and from what I've seen defensively, like I said, from James, I think Hunter is able to land some of those punches and probably put him out. So I'm not confident in this one. I mean, I don't think you can be because, again, stylistically, it's an intriguing matchup, but I'm going to lean with the striker here. I'm going to think that he sprawls and brawls well enough to get the W here and probably finishes James along the way. If he does not, though, James has the cardio edge. James, honestly, as the fight progresses, has a better chance to win this fight because I think he could take the fight to the floor, and if he does, he's going to win this fight. So I think it's either going to be James on the ground winning this fight, as we all expect, or it's going to be Hunter getting the knockout. So I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Hunter KOing James.
This is a bit of a tricky matchup, primarily striker versus grappler. Hunter is a wild, almost unorthodox striker, very aggressive, just goes right at you from the beginning of the first bell and tries to take his opponent out very quickly. James, there was not much footage on him, but from what I did see, he's a good grappler, and he's not terrible on the feet. I mean, he does have a TKO, basically from rocking his opponent and then finishing them with a ground and pound. But for the most part, James wants to get takedowns, get you to the floor, and then work for submissions, because that's how he's got a finish in all of his other wins. So, realistically, it's going to be Hunter trying to take James's head off right away. And if that doesn't work, if James can weather that storm, then I see him potentially getting some takedowns and then either winning a decision or maybe getting a submission. Hunter is extremely aggressive, very reckless and wild. I think he could be open to getting countered. His biggest win was his most recent fight, which was a little over a month ago, where he scored a first round 40-second knockout of UFC vet Chris Dempsey. Now, that's not the biggest feather in anybody's cap, but I mean, he still did pick up a knockout off of a head kick. So James is going to have to be careful of that. And in the clinch, Hunter has very unorthodox dirty boxing. He just kind of ducks his head down and starts winging his hands at his opponent's face from the clinch, around the outside, kind of like overhand punches. And they work. And he can do some damage. He definitely has some pop. So even though he's a bit wild and crazy, if James isn't careful, if his striking defense is not on point, he's going to get clipped. But I think James can withstand what Hunter brings, and because of the recklessness and wildness of Hunter, I think that's going to open up opportunities to get it to the floor. So I'm actually going to side with Ryan James here. So James is my pick. Now, dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Chad Laprise, who is 11-2, taking on Thibault Goudy, who is also 11-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Laprise minus 270, the comeback on Goudy at plus 190. Right now, looking over at the line, it's Laprise minus 300, the comeback on Goudy is plus 250. Looking across the down best screen, it looks like there's still 265s out there for Laprise, 270s, 280s. It probably will settle around 300 where 5dimes.eu is currently right now. Seems like, most people think that this is kind of a gimme fight for Laprise. I'm not so sure though. What you have here really is striker versus striker. Both these guys are a little bit more well-rounded than that and are better than that. Goudy, of course, is not going to really receive that much respect overall from the betting community, from the MMA diehards as well, because based on what he's accomplished thus far throughout his UFC career, it hasn't been overly impressive. On Tough 23, he's a tough vet. He lost to Tamer by decision in a pretty good fight. And that's not necessarily a bad loss to Tamer. Tamer's a pretty talented fighter, as we all know. But I think more than anything, getting dropped by Pekellen and then choked out early in that fight kind of, it sticks out and stands out in people's minds for sure. And then, of course, in his last fight, he got finished by Mercier, Abin Mercier in the third round, but he was pretty competitive and has moments against Mercier in that fight as well. So with all that being said, I don't think Goudy is still as bad as everybody thinks. I think the guy has a tremendous amount of knockout power on the feet. He's got some accuracy. He's got some decent takedown defense overall, depending on who he's matched up with. And he has the ability to submit people as well. So he's a pretty well-rounded fighter with heavy hands, accuracy, and is a dangerous guy. So Laprise cannot take this fight lightly. But overall, you got to be honest here and think that Laprise definitely is the better of the two as far as striking goes. That's what Laprise does best. He's been working hard on his wrestling. His takedown defense is legit as well. And offensively, he can get some takedowns. So Laprise is a pretty good fighter. I know he's coming off back-to-back losses to Pearson and Trinaldo, but obviously the Pearson fight was kind of, they switched things up last minute on him as well. So it was kind of tough to adapt to a new opponent, especially the guy of Pearson's caliber, especially a guy is going to strike with you on the feet and is a pretty good striker. So you got to give him credit for that. He hung in there and made it interesting. It was a close competitive fight. The Trinaldo loss, Trinaldo has a ton of power, so it's not really that shocking either. But with that being said, again, Trinaldo was a decent little dog against Laprise, and he caught him. I think Goudy is the type of fighter that also has a tremendous amount of knockout power, and if Laprise, again, is not careful, he can get the job done as well. So I think Laprise is going to use his movement, use his speed, land a little bit more effective with the striking game, maybe mix in a takedown or two, and probably get this fight to the scorecards and win a lot more competitive than all of us think type of decision. Could see Laprise maybe not Goudy out. Goudy's chin is a bit suspect again. He does get rocked a little bit, of course. Again, I just mentioned that earlier. But I could say the same thing for Laprise. So these guys are both capable of knocking each other out. I think if it does hit the scorecard, it's going to be pretty competitive. So I do think it's a dog or pass situation, especially where the line is now. I don't see any value on Laprise in this fight, even if he is going to win, and I am going to pick him to do so. But I think it is a dog or pass situation. But I am going to lean towards Laprise. I think he probably does get the decision here, or maybe finish Goudy along the way.
And I don't think this fight will be quite as close as Nick says it is. To me, this feels like Chad Laprise is getting a fight to bounce back on in Canada, get a win for the Canada fans that are there, and then move on to the rest of the card. Thibault Goudy has just not looked good in the UFC so far. UFC debut, he gets clipped by Timo Pekellen and finished right away, 20 seconds. And then second fight, he faces Aubin Mercier, who Laprise beat to win that season of The Ultimate Fighter between Canada versus Australia. And Alban Mercier just took Gowdy down and then finished him with a submission. And against Chad Laprise, I think I'm not quite as worried about Gowdy landing that big knockout, because if you watched Laprise against Trinaldo when he did get caught and knocked out, Trinaldo's a southpaw. He has good power. He hit him with a strong left hand. I just don't think Laprise was quite fully prepared defensively to face a southpaw. And Gowdy, his big power is in his right hand. He's right-handed. So this is more traditional. I think Laprise will be better prepared for it defensively and offensively. And as long as that right hand doesn't connect, then Laprise should be fine. I see Laprise winning a decision on the feet if he doesn't hurt Gowdy. And to me, Gowdy's chin is much more suspect than Laprise's. And Laprise is, a crafty vet. He's been around the block, and he's looked pretty good in the UFC. I mean, his last fight was a split decision loss to Ross Pearson on the feet. So, I think that he should be in pretty good shape here. And realistically, the only way I see Gowdy winning is if he hurts Laprise standing or knocks him out standing with that big right hand. And I think Laprise can avoid that over the course of 3 rounds. And I think Laprise actually has a decent chance of knocking out Gowdy. Even though he doesn't have quite as much one-punch power, I think his defense is better than Gowdy's, and I think his chin is a little bit better than Gowdy's as well. And if the fight does go to the floor, Laprise has a little bit of wrestling that he might want to mix in, although he doesn't have to if he needs a win. So my pick is going to be Chad Laprise here. Now, moving to the big network Fox, we have Shane Campbell, who is 12-5, taking on UFC newcomer Felipe Silva, who is 7-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I've been Campbell -165, the comeback on Silva at +125. Right now, looking over at 5 dimes, it is Campbell -125, the comeback on Silva is +105. So overall action coming in on the dog a little bit. It's dropped 20 cents. Sure, we'll see some support back on Campbell a little bit, but it'll probably stay closer to this area. And I think it is fair where the current line is, because this is a close fight. I mean, it really is. I mean, I've been impressed with Campbell. I'm a fan of his. The guy definitely is a force to be reckoned with. I mean, at lightweight, he's not an easy out at all. I mean, he's got his problems. I mean, defensively, I think it is a concern. He's got kind of that tall man's defense. He gets clipped a little bit more than you'd like. But offensively, the guy's a beast, man. I mean, he's got really good striking. He's got decent wrestling. He's been working on that part of his game. He's got decent submissions to go along with it. But, I mean, make no mistake, Campbell is more known for his striking and more known for his knockout power than anything else. So he has the ability to do that. And he could do that to Silva. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, Campbell's a dangerous guy. But defensively, again, is what your concern is with Campbell. I mean, on the ground, he's been subbed. He's been rocked and knocked down on the feet as well. So if he could tighten up that defense a little bit, I'd be a lot more confident in Campbell. But he's facing a UFC debuter here in Silva, which is not an easy out. So I can definitely understand why the public took the dog action early on. Those people that did probably did their homework, obviously, in this fight. And Silva, again, is a tough out because he's a Muay Thai specialist, but he's the type of Muay Thai specialist that's also pretty game on the ground and is able to submit people off his back even. So the guy's dangerous no matter where the fight takes place. But getting into it a little bit more, I mean, he's a technical striker. He's very clean, effective, accurate. He's got some good clinch work. His takedowns do need some work as far as his wrestling goes. But, I mean, if he does get put on his back, his takedown D is okay, but he can be put on his back. If he does, again, he attacks constantly with submissions, attacks and tries to kind of, scramble out of bad position as well. So he scrambles solid. He looks to attack with subs from the ground as well. But really, he's a striker, again, more like Campbell. So most of his fights he's won by KO, and most of them have been in the first round. So he's an effective striker with the ability to finish fights on the ground as well. I mean, both these guys you could say the same thing about. So this is a tough fight. I mean, it is really a toss-up. I think, obviously, you got to give a little bit of an edge to Campbell. He's got the UFC experience. I think he's got the better resume overall, better opponents he's faced. But this could be very well a dog or pass situation. It's kind of hard to lay the juice on Campbell, especially with his defense problems that he has defensively against a guy like Silva that does have a tremendous amount of offense. It makes it kind of tough. So I am going to lean Campbell to win this fight, but it's a slight lean, and I do think it is a dog or pass situation here.
This fight's a bit tricky for me. I mean, Shane Campbell, Felipe Silva on the feet, they're relatively similar. I mean, Campbell has the excellent Muay Thai kickboxing background. Silva is a Muay Thai and kickboxing champion out of Brazil. So, on the feet, I think Campbell is a little bit better from distance. He lands some pretty good kicks, and Silva, he's a little bit better on the inside. He actually is a little more wild and aggressive on the inside. He's not afraid to brawl whatsoever. So Campbell definitely needs to be prepared for that, especially with how Campbell defensively sometimes he's more focused on offense and he can definitely get hit. So on the feet, I think this will be even and competitive. Silva drops down to the body with a lot of his shots too, so that could take its toll on Campbell. And then a lot of people breaking down this fight, they point out that, Campbell has the wrestling and he has a pretty good ground game. And I would say that Campbell's ground game is a bit underrated, but that hasn't stopped him from getting, completely dominated on the ground by Eric Koch in his last fight. So don't forget that. And Silva, I think his ground game is a bit underrated. Now, he's not going to be out there looking for takedowns or anything, but if he gets taken down, he's a bit crafty off of his back. I mean, he trained under Cristiano Marcelo. I think he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt. And the one time I saw in the fight film study that he did get taken down, I mean, he immediately transitioned to a triangle armbar and got a submission in about a minute and a half against an opponent. So Silva definitely does seem like he's capable of defending himself and then even attacking from getting taken down. So if I'm Shane Campbell, I probably just want to keep this standing, and then if I get a takedown, I just want to lay and pray. I don't want to do too much or give too much space for Silva to launch up some attacks at him. So I actually think that Felipe Silva might be getting Campbell at a good time. Campbell was knocked out by John McDessie. He did have a bounce-back performance against Elias Silverio, but then getting submitted by Eric Koch. He hasn't exactly had the best run in his UFC career so far, and I think Felipe Silva actually could catch him on the feet and could potentially catch him on the ground. So I'm going to very, very slightly lean Felipe Silva here to pick up the win in his UFC debut. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Gareth McClellan, who is 13-4, taking on Alessio Di Chirico, who is 9-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Di Chirico at -265, the comeback of McClellan at +185. Right now, Di Chirico did drop a little bit. It's -225. The comeback of McClellan is +185. And margins have tightened up a little bit in this fight as well. And it looks like across the board, it looks like it's -210s out there, 215s out there. So it'll stay between 210 to 225 for the time being. I think it'll probably eventually go back up to where I opened it around -265 or so, because I do expect a little bit maybe sharper action to come in on Di Chirico's way. I mean, McClellan's not an easy out. I mean, he's coming off of loss to Seidenblad, and you know what his problem there honestly was? He wasn't aggressive enough. He got picked apart and ultimately TKO'd by a grappler. I mean, obviously Seidenblad is a little bit more than that. He did look pretty good. You got to give Seidenblad credit for that fight, but still, McClellan, I don't know, it wasn't a very good performance, and he's had a couple of those, along the way here as well. So McClellan has a lot of power. I mean, he's the type of fighter that could definitely grind on you, grind you out a little bit, make the fight tough, and he can obviously KO you at any time too. He's got that kind of power to go along with it because he's physically strong. But that being said, I don't know. He's just not that great. He doesn't excel in any particular area. Like, he's not a real dominant fighter in the stand-up game, or he's not a real dominant wrestler. In fact, he's been put on his back a little bit more often than you'd like to see in a fighter like that. So he is a southpaw. I mean, he's got that going for him, but Chirico actually fought a southpaw in his UFC debut as well. So I don't think that's even going to throw him off. And this is a tough fight when it comes down to it for McClellan. And for Di Chirico, I was actually impressed. I mean, I realized that, it was a UFC debut. He fought a pretty decent opponent and he hung in there with him. I mean, the guy has the technical skill set, and he's young enough still at age 26 that he's going to keep on improving. I mean, he's the type of fighter that really pushes forward, picks his shots carefully, but is aggressive enough to really do some damage along the way and win rounds with his striking. And then also he's got a bit of a wrestling game. He's able to take the fight to the floor, and on the floor he's got submissions to go along with it. So another very complete, talented fighter coming out of Italy, which, you know what, it's good to see some more European fighters making their UFC debuts like this that is a little bit unknown. I mean, before Di Chirico came in, I mean, only maybe the diehards or European MMA fans kind of knew about him, but most of us had no clue on the talent or potential this guy had. So I'm glad to see him over in the UFC. I think he's going to win a lot of fights at middleweight. I think he's going to slowly get better and improve. And this is a fight that he could definitely win, and I think he will, because regardless of where the fight takes place, Jericho is just the better fighter. I think McClellan, to win this fight, is going to have to kind of make this a really slow, boring fight, maybe pin Jericho against the fence and just kind of hold him there and stall out. But I don't think he's going to be able to do that. I think Jericho is going to be able to move out of the way. I think he's going to use the space wisely and pick McClellan apart and probably knock him out. I mean, McClellan lost again to Siedenblad, which isn't really a striking-based fighter, and Jericho is a much better fighter, and he's going to bring it. So I do think that Jericho along the way probably finishes McClellan, and this fight does not hit the scorecard. Even if it does, if McClellan does survive, I think Jericho wins on the cards anyway. So this is a favorite or pass situation, and I do believe Jericho is going to open up some eyes here, and I think he's going to continue to improve. And you got to watch out for this guy in the middleweight division for sure.
Yeah, I like Jericho too. I mean, Gareth McClellan has not looked great in the UFC, and honestly, if not for a bit of a fence grab and his opponent completely gassing, I don't think he'd have any wins in the UFC at all. His last fight against Siedenblad, he just got mauled on the feet, which was a bit surprising because Siedenblad isn't a very good striker, and that's actually one of his weaknesses. So, I mean, if Siedenblad can take out McClellan on the feet, then I definitely think Jericho can. Jericho is pretty aggressive on the feet. He's got some technique, a little bit of pop in his hands. Now, he lost a decision in his UFC debut to Bohan Velikovic, and Velikovic is actually a welterweight, but he's a very big welterweight, and these guys were both talented newcomers making their debuts together. So I'm not going to give Jericho too much flack for that. And realistically, Gareth McClellan is probably one of the worst middleweights that's currently on the UFC roster. He's very slow. He's got a decent ground game. He's not very dangerous on the feet at all. And he can be controlled on the ground pretty easily. So, I mean, if Jericho wants, I think he can get takedowns, or he can just push the pace on the feet and outstrike McClellan. I don't think he should be too worried about McClellan's power, and I don't think he'll be too worried about McClellan on the ground. So I think Jericho wins this wherever it goes. So I actually really like Jericho here at any point in the fight even, because it's not like McClellan's really strong early either. So my pick is definitely going to be Jericho to win. Now dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Enrique Barzola, who is 11-2-1, taking on Kyle Bochniak, who is 6-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Bochniak, minus 185, the comeback on Barzola at plus 145. Line dropped a little bit, line margins halftime up. Right now it's Bochniak minus 170, the comeback on Barzola is plus 150. So two-way action coming in this fight. Not a lot of strong opinion here. I do believe that Bochniak has a decent edge in this fight. I mean, Barzola, of course, I'll start off with him actually. I mean, he's the Ultimate Fighter Latin America 2 winner. It was impressive. I mean, honestly, what he did as far as his grinding style when he was able to accomplish and win the Ultimate Fighter tournament. I mean, you got to give the guy credit for sure. He's really a pretty underrated grappler. I mean, he takes the fight to the ground. He's got a little bit of speed and power on the feet as well. So it's not like the guy, can't hang in there and strike with people. But I mean, make no mistake, he's that type of grinder that wants to get the fight to the ground, wants to control his opponent, look for the sub, drop some ground and pound. That's how he wins fights. So the guy is pretty solid. He's dropping down to 145 now from, the show was actually 155. So he's dropping down to a weight class that I think suits him even better in this spot. And I mean, the guy, he definitely has some talent. I just think Bochniak is a tough matchup for him though. I mean, his debut loss to Rosa was on short notice, and he actually won the first round. I mean, and he was game, I think, against Rosa. I mean, it was a pretty competitive fight. Now, of course, as the fight progressed, he slowed down a little bit. Again, you can maybe kind of say that was because of the short notice aspect of the fight a little bit, but I mean, he had the heart and, to hang in there and last 3 rounds against a very solid opponent like Rosa, even if so, and do very well. So Bochniak, I think, is with a full camp here, he's going to be a lot better off. He's got that kind of UFC jitters out of his way as well. So I think he's going to perform really well. And as far as getting into his background, I mean, he's a really good prospect. Again, fairly young. I mean, he's 29, so he's not one of these young guns that we're seeing come into the UFC. But overall, the guy has really good speed and power on the feet, decent movement, good kickboxing, and boxing attack as well. And he counters with his right hand. He's got some serious power in that right hand, and he counters and uses it well. His takedown defense is also pretty solid. He does scramble back up well if you are able to get him down. I mean, he's the type of fighter that doesn't kind of let you lay and prey on him. He'll try to do his best to scramble out of a bad position, get back to the feet. And on the feet is where he can do some damage. I mean, he has a decent wrestling base as well, so offensively he can get some takedowns. So that's why stylistically I think this is a tough matchup for Barzalo, because I think Barzalo cannot really lay and prey on him as much as he wants. Bochniak is going to spend the majority of the fight on the feet, and he is the better striker here. I think he's going to be able to land enough on Barzola, and he's going to make it a grueling type of fight where Barzola is going to really have to push the pace. And by round 3, I think Barzola is going to slow down enough that Bochniak might catch him. I mean, that's one thing I have noticed in Barzola's game as the fight progresses. Like most fighters, I mean, he tends to slow down a little bit. So I think the cardio edge might go to Bochniak. I mean, we'll see. We got to see what Barzola is made of in this fight and how he really comes into this fight. He's going to be confident as well. And he is training, I should mention, with American Top Team along the way is what I heard. So Barzola, I'm expecting to see an improved version of Barzola, which is kind of scary for a lot of people, especially at featherweight, because the guy, again, has that style that he can win fights. But with all that being said, I still think stylistically this is a bad matchup for him, and Bochniak's going to get to win. So I am picking Bochniak. I'm fairly confident with it, and it is a favored or pass situation, in my opinion, in this spot.
Yeah, I really like Kyle Bochniak here. Enrique Barzola, in his UFC debut, he won tough Latin America, but he looked very one-dimensional in that fight. It was pretty much just wait for his opponent to wing a haymaker at him and then duck down and get a takedown and then not do a whole lot with it. He's not a huge ground and pound threat. He's not a huge submission threat. He's just more of a grappling threat with wrestling. And Kyle Bochniak is a very talented grappler in his own right, so I'm not super concerned about Barzola's takedowns here. Bochniak in his UFC debut took on a very game opponent in Charles Rosa on very short notice, and he got right in Rosa's face. He dropped him. He looked really strong. It's just more that he ran out of steam because it was such a short notice fight, and he was super hyped up for the UFC debut, and he had his opponent in trouble, and he just couldn't quite put him away, and then he ran out of steam, and Rosa was able to win. So I think now with a full training camp, now that he's officially in the UFC, he's not going to be intimidated or, kind of distracted by the bright lights of the octagon and everything. I think Bochniak turns it around here a little bit, and then you're going to see him, I think, dominate Barzola on the feet. And if it does go to the ground, I don't see Barzola keeping it there for long, and I can see Bochniak kind of making Barzola almost even regret going to the ground because he might be able to sweep him. He could just get to his feet quickly, and I think he's going to really make Barzola work. And even though Barzola has been spending some time with the American Top Team, I just don't think that, one training camp is going to be enough to completely change his game. So Barzola is probably going to push forward a little bit on the feet, throw a little bit of hands, but I don't think it's anything Bochniak should be afraid of. And I just see Bochniak getting the better of Barzola over the course of 3 rounds, potentially getting a finish. But I do like Bochniak to get the win here, so I'm going to pick him. Now moving on to the main event of the preliminary card, we have a middleweight contest between Sam Alvey, who was 27-8 with 1 no contest, and Kevin Casey, who was 9-4-1 with 2 no contests. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Alvey, -190. The comeback on Casey is +150. And right now over 5 dimes, it's -225 for Alvey. The comeback on Casey is +185. There's still some 2-to-1s out there, quite a few 2-to-1s out there as well. 5 dimes a little bit higher. Of course, they take a lot of parlay action compared to most books as well. So I imagine that's the case, and that's the reason why they stay up. But most of us know about these guys. I mean, Alvey and Casey, so there's not really a lot to say. You have your striker versus your grappler matchup. I mean, both these guys, again, you could say are more than just that, but that's stylistically, that's what they look to do. Casey's going to look to take this fight to the ground, try to control, try to smother, try to sub Alvey's going to look to sprawl and brawl and keep this fight up and knock Casey out. I mean, Alvey, looking at the guy, you wouldn't think he's got a tremendous amount of knockout power, but he does. He's accurate, he's precise, and he's got a ton of power in his hands. And that necessarily isn't a good formula for Casey, considering Alvey has some decent takedown defense along the way as well. Casey does have some power in his hands, so you cannot count the fact out that his striking has improved. He's getting better. He's getting a little bit more confident as well. So he could clip Alvey. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked at all to see Casey even land, a knockout punch here. I doubt it happens, but it wouldn't be shocking. He has that kind of power that he can put most middleweights out, of course, but Casey is not going to want to strike as much in the spot. He's going to want to try to get it to the floor, and he might have some success early on, but like most people, I think, as the fight progresses, it's going to be Alvey's to take. I mean, Casey does tend to slow down a little bit. His cardio issue, I mean, we all know that it's there. It's getting better at times. I mean, he's the type of guy that can go 3 rounds and can win some fights on the cards now, but he does still drastically slow. Alvey is more of a steady fighter. Sometimes his inactivity bothers you a little bit, but the truth is, as the fight progresses, he should still be able to sprawl and brawl and probably not Casey out. So I'm thinking that Alvey gets the win here, of course. That's why he's favored. Most of us agree with this spot as well. But it's tough, man. As far as the bet goes, I would recommend probably at over 2-1 in this spot, probably staying away from it. But again, I do expect Alvey to win, so I can understand if not, or if people are throwing in parlays, I get that as well. But overall, I do think it's Alvey's fight to win or lose. If he fights smart, if he continues to be aggressive and just not sit there and let his opponent dictate the pace, I think he can win this fight, and he probably will. So my pick is Alvey to win.
Yeah, Sam Alvey's all power, although his pace has never been great. And Kevin Casey is all action early. And honestly, if Sam Alvey can just weather that storm, then he should be in pretty good shape. Although Casey is definitely going to be dangerous, as he always is in the first round. He's a solid grappler, pretty good wrestling, good submission ability, and he has some heavy hands, especially if he can get inside on the feet or if he can get a dominant position on the ground. I think it'll be tough for Casey to get a dominant position on the ground, even if he does get a takedown, because Alvey will probably be defending along the fence, and he'll just kind of be annoying, making it difficult for Casey to advance position, and then he'll be wall walking up and stuff like that. And with Alvey, I think his biggest problem has always been he's had a little bit of trouble pulling the trigger, and he can sometimes just be stuck in that, need to land that one big punch mode, and then he lets his opponent dictate everything. And that's not going to be as big of a problem against Casey, because Casey's going to go right after him. And if Casey can't put Alvey away, I'm not quite convinced that he'll have enough in the tank to win 2 rounds and then hold on for a decision. Casey just kind of runs out of steam in fights, and if he does that, Alvey is going to absolutely maul him. I mean, he has so much power in both hands, especially the right, and Casey has been knocked out, TKO'd multiple times, so there is a very, very realistic possibility that if Casey does not get those takedowns and does not get a finish, that Sam Alvey is just going to connect with something real hard and Casey's going to go down. So I'm going to side with Sam Alvey. I don't think Casey can get that finish, and I think Sam Alvey picks up a relatively impressive knockout victory along the way at some point. Now moving on to the main card on Big Network Fox, we have a lightweight contest between Joe Lozon, who is 26-12, and Jim Miller, who is 26-8 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Miller -130, the comeback on Lozon at -110. Close fight, close opener, and right now it's still fairly close. It's Lozon -145, the comeback on Miller +125. I'm not surprised at all that the line flipped a little bit. I knew that more public support would come in on Lozon, especially it's kind of what you've done for me lately. And overall, there's no doubt that, Miller has looked like the more declined fighter, and Lozon has looked like he's still kind of actually getting better and improving as the fight goes. So he's closed the gap. A lot of people believe since their first meeting in 2012 that Lozon is the better fighter now. Because Miller's kind of looked bad throughout his performances. And I understand it. That Diego Sanchez loss to Miller was a little bit, Diego's a warrior, so we all know that, but you don't lose that fight at this point of his career. But for credit here, Miller did say after that fight that, or actually I should say after his win over Gomi, that he was, diagnosed with Lyme disease, and that's kind of had an effect on him, and he's gotten some medication to kind of take that away. Now, it is what it is. You can think that has an impact or not. The decline could be real for sure. But I'm going to give Miller a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. And I think overall, if you look back, even at their first performance, I know it was 4 years ago, but Miller was definitely the better fighter in all areas. He's a southpaw. I think that gives Lozon a little bit of problems. He even had a little bit of problems against Dunham in that aspect as well recently. So I think Miller is just a better fighter everywhere the fight takes place. I think he's a better striker. I think he's the better wrestler. I think he can basically dictate the pace a little bit more too. Now, can Lozon be dangerous enough to clip Miller to get on top and maybe possibly even sub Miller? Yes, he can. And he's going to be a little bit more confident. He's definitely going to want to come back and redeem that loss against Miller. And at this point, he might do that. I mean, he looked great in knocking out Diego Sanchez early. He's got some confidence in going into this fight as well. So this should be an ultra war, really. But everybody just counting Miller out in this spot. And it makes me like Miller that much more, to be honest with you. I think it is going to be another competitive fight. I mean, it's not like Lozon's going to go out there, I don't think, and blow Miller out of the water. I mean, I don't think these guys finish each other. I think they can neutralize each other out on the ground to get him a little bit. I think they can even kind of survive each other in the striking game aspect as well. But these guys are talented enough to end the fight on the feet and end the fight on the ground. So nothing surprises me in this fight at all. I mean, we could see a finish either way along the way, or we could see it hit the scorecards and be a competitive decision. But if it does, I think it probably goes to the cards. And if so, I think Miller wins this fight, honestly. I think it's going to be another competitive decision. I think a lot of people are just simply underestimating Miller, and I think they're writing him off too much. And again, I was one of the ones that really think that Miller hit that decline spot as well. But I think stylistically, how he matches up with Lozon is pretty good. He's going to be confident. I liked the fact that he wants to get right back in there. I mean, after he beat Gomi, he was telling the UFC he wants another fight quick. He feels good, the best he's felt in a few years. So mentally, I think Miller's in the best spot that he's been in as well. But as far as you throw all that out of the equation, how they match up skill-wise, I think is still really close, and it's going to be a competitive fight. So I think it's a dog or pass situation right now. I don't agree with the public action coming in on Lozon. I'm not surprised by it, but I don't agree with it. So I'm going to go against the grain in most people's thoughts, and I'm going to pick Miller to win this fight.
Yes, Miller looked really good against Takanori Gomi, but I just can't take too much away from that, because if you look at how Takanori Gomi has performed, I mean, the fight before that, Joe Lozon obliterated Gomi, and the fight before that, Gomi landed one strike before getting knocked out in the first round by Miles Jury. I mean, he's been knocked out in the first round 3 straight fights. So, I mean, there's only so much you can take from an impressive win over basically a completely shot veteran. Now, the fights that I think you can take things from for Jim Miller are the fights that he had right before that. And that is the decision loss to Diego Sanchez and the submission loss to Michael Chiesa. Now, Miller started strong against Chiesa. He actually had a very good ground game going. He actually was out grappling Chiesa, and then he just ran out of steam a little bit. And the second he slowed down, Chiesa pounced and was able to tap him out. And I think that could be a huge issue here with Miller. And then the same thing, Diego Sanchez. I mean, that was a bit of a war, and Miller did land a few more strikes than Sanchez, but Sanchez got some takedowns, and Sanchez was able to win a decision against Miller. And that's a bit unforgivable because, I mean, Joe Lozon, who is fighting Jim Miller here in his most recent fight, just completely blew Diego Sanchez out of the water. And it's not exactly like Diego Sanchez has been a credible name over the last couple of years. I mean, he has not looked that good, but he looked good against Miller. So I am definitely concerned in that department. And yes, Miller did have some losses to some very good high profile fighters like Nate Diaz and Beneil Dariush and Donald Cerrone, but I think Joe Lozon is in just a better place physically, mentally, you name it. Lozon, obviously he smashed Diego Sanchez, but he's looked pretty good overall. I mean, his striking is definitely getting better. I mean, his ground game is always good. It's always been good. But his striking, I mean, with him knocking out Joe Lozon, with him picking up a TKO on the ground against Gomi, with his excellent striking against Michael Chiesa, where he opened up a nasty cut in just a back and forth brawl, and that forced a stoppage of that bout. So I think Joe Lozon, his stand-up has improved a lot since the last time he fought Jim Miller. I mean, that last time Miller got in Lozon's face, he landed huge shots, he landed monster elbows, he opened a huge cut on Lozon. I mean, that was just a bloody back and forth brawl. But Miller definitely was the better fighter that night. I will not doubt that whatsoever. But if you look how they've performed since then, I think Miller has faced a tougher opposition, but he's also been getting beat up a lot. I mean, at one point people were like, Jim Miller's on a huge win streak. He should be a title contender. And then you're like, well, Jim Miller's never been finished. And then you go, he's never been submitted. And then you go, oh, well, he's never been knocked out. And every one of these little checklist things are getting checked off. And I think Joe Lauzon's in a good spot here to get revenge. Now, Miller might still be the better technical striker, but I think Lauzon packs a little bit more power. I think Lauzon's chin is a little bit better. And I think Lauzon's conditioning, something that he's worked on a lot, is way better now. Lauzon used to be the type of guy that slowed down a lot because he was just 100 miles an hour pedal to the metal at the beginning of a fight. And now he paces himself a little bit, but he can still be dangerous. And even if Miller wins the first round, I think Lauzon can kind of turn the tides on him this time around, because I just don't trust Jim Miller over the course of 3 rounds at this point. So I'm going to side with Joe Lauzon. I think he's just got a little bit more gas left in the tank as a, kind of a crafty vet in this battle of veterans. Now dropping down to the women's strawweight division, we have Paige Van Zant, who is 6-2, taking on Bec Rawlings, who is 7-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I've been Van Zant minus 245 to come back on Rawlings at plus 175. And right now, looking over at 5 dimes, it is Van Zant minus 210 to come back on Rawlings, still plus 175. So line margins have tightened up. Line staying steady. If you're looking at the dog price there as well. And a lot of it, this is a close matchup. A lot of it is Van Zant's popularity, honestly, that kind of is keeping line a little bit higher. I think that it could be a little bit lower, and it might. If any sharp action comes in on the dog, I understand it. Now, that being said, it's still a difficult fight for Rawlings because I think Van Zant is going to be the one, if he hits the scorecards, to probably come out with a decision, because I think her ground game, her control, her ability to scramble is going to be the flaw in Rawlings here. On the feet, it's going to be competitive, but I do give Rawlings the edge. I think she's a little bit more dangerous on the feet. She has a little bit more pop in her punches as well, and she's a pretty smart fighter. So I think that Rawlings does have that edge, but Van Zant can hang. I don't think she's going to get overwhelmed there, but on the ground is where definitely Van Zant should have a slight edge. Now, Rawlings is not, a fish out of water on the ground either. She does have a decent ground game, but that is where she can get beat, and I think Van Zant will utilize that and take that over. So both these ladies are well-rounded. This is a big fight for both. Both of them are fairly young as well. Obviously, Van Zant has more upside. She's only 22 years old. The UFC with the popularity, I'm sure they want her to come out with a win here. To get back on track and kind of put together a nice little run for her as well, because she's a very marketable fighter. So, it is going to be a competitive fight. I do expect it to hit the scorecards, as most of us do as well, and I think it'll be a fairly competitive decision. So I'm not so sure you can lay Paige Van Zant in this spot. I think you kind of got to stay away from it, or maybe Rawlings as a dog is live, but I still lean a little bit more towards Van Zant, obviously, because I do think she's the more complete fighter, and if this fight does hit the scorecards, it's probably going to be in her favor. So I'm going to lean with Van Zant.
This fight's pretty straightforward. Bec Rawlings wants to keep the fight standing, and she wants to keep her distance. Paige Van Zant wants to close the distance as much as possible. Van Zant has been working on her striking, but that is still by far the weakest part of her game. And I just think if she wants to win, she just needs to get inside, get a hold of Rawlings. She doesn't have to get a takedown. It would help, but basically it's just all about closing that distance. If she can't get a takedown, as long as she can clinch, that's where Van Zant can shine a little bit. She's very active, one of the most energetic and active fighters on the entire roster, and I think she can throw a lot of knees, maybe some short elbows on the inside against Rawlings, do some serious damage to the legs of Rawlings with those knees, and maybe the torso too. And then if she gets takedowns, Van Zant is extremely aggressive on the canvas, not just with potentially looking for submission opportunities or guard passes, but she just punches away and just wears you out. The fight against Felice Herrig is the perfect example of that, where Herrig was strong early, but Van Zant just kept coming and coming and coming, and then wore her down and almost finished her just from beating the tar out of her from top position. Now, Rawlings, her takedown defense is okay, but she got taken down a ton by Carla Esparza when she fought for the title way back when. And then in her UFC debut, she got taken down repeatedly by Heather Jo Clark. And that's the most damning for me. Heather Jo Clark is not exactly an A-list UFC women's strawweight. And Clark was able to get a takedown or two and passed guard 4 separate times. So if Van Zandt gets this fight to the floor. Even though Rawlings has shown a bit of an improved ground game, like with her submission victory over Lisa Ellis, I just think that it'll be too much. So I just think it's too unrealistic to see Beck Rawlings keep this fight at distance for 3 straight rounds. I think Paige Van Zandt has a lot to prove. She wants to beat back some of her haters a little bit, and I think this is a winnable fight as long as she can close that distance. So I'm going to side with Paige Van Zandt. Now, moving up to the featherweight division, we have Anthony Pettis, who is 18-5, making his featherweight debut against Charles Oliveira, who is 21-5 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Pettis minus 190, the comeback on Oliveira at plus 150. It's staying fairly steady. Right now it's Pettis minus 175, Oliveira's plus 155. So again, another spot where line margins have tightened up. And there is two-way action coming on this fight. Early on it was Oliveira. Now we're getting some action back on Pettis too, and it'll continue to go that way. Both these guys extremely talented. Of course, Pettis is dropping down to 145 pounds, making his debut at featherweight after he's kind of run into a tough stint at lightweight. I mean, stylistically, the matchups that he's faced, he hasn't been dominating his opponents like he was in the past when he en route to winning the UFC lightweight title. I mean, it's unfortunate for Pettis. I know he's had some injuries. He's had some setbacks along the way, and he's such a talented fighter. Everywhere the fight takes place, the guy's dangerous, of course. He can win by sub. He can win, obviously. He's got beautiful striking technique. He's got power to go along with it. Pettis is a complete fighter, a dominant fighter, champion-worthy fighter, obviously, as well. So Pettis is legit, and at 145, he could definitely make some waves, and I hope he looks good because, man, I want to see him kind of make a run towards that title because it'll get interesting with Pettis at featherweight, especially if he can kind of stifle some of these wrestlers, you know, sprawl and brawl like he can do at times. But again, that is kind of his weakness though, is getting bullied, getting pressured, getting put up against the cage, getting taken down, and getting beat on the ground. If he can't sub you against a strong wrestler, obviously he's going to probably not have that much success. So that is the blueprint to beat Pettis. I mean, you got to put that pressure on him and try to get him to the ground and control him without getting subbed. Oliveira is going to look to do that. But the thing with Oliveira is not just looking to get it to the ground. The guy can submit pretty much anybody. I mean, if you look back through his career, he submitted some pretty solid opponents. I mean, one that stands out in my mind the most is Hioki. Who submits that guy? Nobody does, man. Oliveira did. So offensively, Oliveira is one of the most dangerous submission artists in all of the UFC. I mean, the guy's that slick. His stand-up's not bad. It's always improving. His clinch game's pretty good. He throws some brutal knees as well. And he tries to push a high pace. But what bothers me the most about Oliveira is his ability to wilt under pressure. I mean, at times, if you look at the Cerrone fight, that was an awful performance by Oliveira. Again, it's Donald Cerrone, so a respectable opponent, I understand. Cub Swanson fight, I think was a pretty bad performance by him as well. And then obviously, against Holloway. His esophagus, what was that all about? I have no idea, but to me, he's the type of guy that if things aren't going smooth all the time, he finds a way out of a fight. And that's not a guy you want to kind of bet on. And, I've been burned in the past by Oliveira as well. And I think he's got all the skill in the world to be a real true contender, but he's got to get better in that aspect of things. Now, other times he's looked okay. Against dangerous opponents. Look what he did to Stevens, Jeremy Stevens. That was a tough fight, and he was able to have success in that fight. And I think that's kind of the blueprint he needs to follow against Pettis here as well. So Oliveira does have a path to victory in this spot. He can win by sub. He could even win on the cards if he's able to get some takedowns and kind of grind Pettis out a little bit. Or, like we said, he's always dangerous for that submission as well. But that being said, Pettis can sprawl and brawl. His takedown defense is pretty good, even though that is his flaw and his kryptonite, as I mentioned here. And I think if Pettis is able to sprawl and brawl a little bit on the feet, Pettis is going to probably land and pick Oliveira apart, and he might make him quit. That's why you kind of have to go towards Pettis in this fight as well, I think, because I trust Pettis a little bit more, even though he does get beat. That RDA fight was brutal for Pettis, but he hung in there. He took some hard shots. He didn't quit. He doesn't have that quit that Oliveira has, and he's got the talent and potential to really do some good things at 145 as well. And stylistically, this is a decent matchup for him if he's able to keep upright and avoid Oliveira's submission. So I am going to pick Pettis to win this fight, but it is a test and it is interesting, and it's hard to kind of go in and go crazy on Pettis at near 2-1. So this is one I think we all sit back and kind of watch and enjoy and see how it plays out, because it should be fairly exciting as long as it lasts, or maybe it goes the distance. We'll see. But overall, I still got to pick Pettis. I just trust him a little bit more in this spot.
I definitely think people should be a little more cautious with this fight. I thought Miles Jury dropping down to the featherweight division would just manhandle Oliveira. He'd pick him apart with the jab. He'd rock him with his punches on the feet. And then if anything did happen on the canvas, Jury was a very talented grappler in the lightweight division that he'd be fine with Oliveira. You know, he'd be able to hold his own. He had good wrestling. He had good jiu-jitsu. He's a black belt. I mean, no problem. But the second Oliveira closed the distance on him, he was able to take his back and then choke him out. I mean, it was a crazy impressive performance by Oliveira there. And Jury hasn't fought since. Now, Oliveira is just a wizard on the canvas. So Anthony Pettis needs to keep his distance at all times. I mean, everybody that has ever had success against Oliveira, for the most part, they've kept their distance and they've landed big shots. You look at the Max Holloway fight where he just landed big punches on the feet. You look at Frankie Edgar where he didn't really screw around on the ground at all. He just kind of went for the boxing and pretty much outboxed him, although he did mix in a couple late takedowns to seal rounds. Cub Swanson just got right in Oliveira's grill, landed big punches, took him out. Donald Cerrone, big punches, big kicks, took him out. So those are the guys that have had a lot of success, and Anthony Pettis should definitely be looking to follow that game plan. I mean, his body kicks are devastating. He can definitely fold Oliveira in half with those. His punches are not quite as game-changing. I think he does have some power in his hands, but I mean, it's really the kicks that do the most damage for Pettis. So he should really be looking to keep as much distance as possible to set up some kicks. And I think those are really where he's going to do his damage, whether it's a head kick like he did when he knocked out Joe Lozon, or a body kick like it was where he took out Donald Cerrone. So it's all about the kicks, I think. Especially the body kick, because I mean, the body kicks did some serious damage to Benson Henderson, completely changed that fight in their final bout where Pettis won the title, and kind of forced Henderson to immediately stop looking to stand and shoot for takedowns. So I am a bit concerned, though. Pettis' takedown defense is not very good. I mean, he's been taken down over and over throughout his career, but Eddie Alvarez most recently, Dos Anjos most recently, and you even go back, Clay Guida, Benson Henderson took him down but got submitted. So I am a little bit concerned if Oliveira has a very grappling-centric approach that he could have some success, but I still feel like this is Anthony Pettis' fight to lose. It's just don't let Oliveira close the distance easily. Otherwise, he could get himself in some trouble. But I'm going to side with Anthony Pettis here. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a 5-round battle in the welterweight division between top contenders Demian Maia, who is 23-6, and former interim champion Carlos Condit, who is 30-9. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I originally opened the line Maia minus 130 with Condit minus 110 on the other side, but when it was moved to a headliner in a 5-round event, we had to resubmit the line, and it was at minus 140 for Condit to come back on Maia, even money. So for this particular fight at UFC on Fox 21, really the real opener is minus 140, even money. I was upset the fact that they made this a 5-rounder because, man, I was about all in on Maia at this spot, honestly, in a 3-round fight especially. So we all know about this matchup. I mean, there's not a ton to say about it. Condit is a tremendous fighter, and with this fight switching to 5 rounds, it definitely helps his cause in getting the W here, because Maia is one of those guys that, I mean, he's not getting any younger, of course. He's, I believe, 38 years old. He does decline or start to fade as the fight progresses in 5-round fights. Now, he's capable of going 5, and you got to give the guy credit, so I'm not trying to knock him on that, but it definitely makes a difference between a 3-round and a 5-round fight for a guy like Demian Maia, because round 4, round 5, if this fight makes it that long, is definitely going to be sketchy for him, because when he slows down, I mean, Condit's going to be ready to pounce. I mean, he's done it in the past. He's very smart. He's very intelligent. He knows what you expect in this fight as well. So the UFC really did Condit a big favor making this 5 rounds. Now, that's not to say that Condit doesn't get subbed before that, because Demian Maia is obviously one of the best BJJ practitioners of all time in the UFC. There's no doubt. I mean, the guy takes your back. He looks for that sub. He's methodical with it. He takes his time. He's patient, and he gets it more times than not. So Maia is capable of submitting anybody in the weight class. Now, is he going to get the job done against Condit? I know Condit's been drilling. He knows what to expect here. Condit's ground game is legit in his own right, so it's not going to be easy against Carlos Condit. But make no mistake, if anybody can sub Condit, it is Maia. And Condit has had that kryptonite in the past where he's been submitted by rear naked choke a few times. So he has got his back taken. He hasn't fought anybody. If you look at his resume, Condit has not fought a real submission threat type of fight. I mean, he's fought some wrestlers, but not the actual BJJ, that guy that was going to look to take his back like Maia will in this spot for a long time. So that raises kind of an eyebrow to me. I think that Maia will get the takedowns early on. And if he does get Condit's back, you never know, man. Maia could finish this fight. So I'm tempted to kind of lean Maia's way. And you know what? I think I am going to still pick him. I'm on the fence a little bit with this fight because I really do believe that, again, as I said at the beginning, with this fight changing to a 5-round fight, it's kind of switched me because I do think that Condit can win now, especially if he survives early. He could probably win this inside, win round 4, win round 5, maybe even steal round 3 if Maia starts slowing down there. So if he does happen to hit the scorecards, maybe he can steal a decision. But I think it is tough, but I do want to lean a little bit towards Maia because I think there is the ability along the way for Maia to get the submission win over Condit. I mean, again, he is going to take his back. I think he is going to get this fight to the ground unless Condit pulls off one of those quick knockouts that he has in the past, and he's more than capable of doing so, of just going out there and knocking a guy out quickly. I mean, Maia is going to get the takedowns and he is going to get this fight to the floor. So it is going to be his fight to win or lose. And maybe he does hang on and win the first 3 rounds and then, Condit does take over, but Maia survives in round 4 or 5 and get the decision as well. So I'm going to go against the grain, I guess, and go back to my original thoughts of Maia winning this fight, but I'm not as confident here for sure. I understand the matchup and I understand what happened here. And it is more geared towards Condit winning this fight. So I wouldn't be shocked if Condit does win, especially if he wins, like I said, late. But overall, man, I think stylistically it is kind of a tough matchup for Condit, and Maia is going to have success taking this fight to the ground and maybe gets a submission. So another spot where I'll probably go against the grain. I'll lean with Damian Maia getting the W here.
Nick brought up a really valid point when we were discussing this fight before the show, where Carlos Condit, when he's fought guys that were looking to grapple, that he's had trouble. I mean, George St. Pierre, Johnny Hendricks, Tyron Woodley, all 3 of them were able to take Condit down pretty much at will, and Condit ended up losing either by decision or TKO along those lines. And on top of that, Condit has never really faced an elite grappler like Damian Maia. Not since he fought Jake Shields in 2006, over 10 years ago. And that was a fight that he also lost, where he got taken down 5 times. So I'm definitely concerned for Carlos Condit here. Damian Maia isn't a wrestler, but he just has this incredible ability to get inside on his opponents and then drag you to the floor with his trips, with his body locks. I mean, he just completely neutralizes you the second he gets on the inside. And he has really been on top of his game lately. I mean, very, very impressive victories for him. Most recently stopping Matt Brown with a late 3rd round finish. Now, Carlos Condit's no joke on the ground. He's a very crafty submission guy. He's pretty good off of his back. He's been working to get better at getting back to his feet after being taken down. But the takedown defense is still complete garbage. So I'm definitely concerned about Damian Maia getting takedowns early and often and then doing some damage with them potentially with his submission games. I mean, he is so good at getting to his opponent's back. And once there, you definitely have to be extremely cautious. I mean, not give him even the slightest opening. So I would not be shocked one bit if Damian Maia wins the first 3 rounds of this fight easily. Easily. But with the addition of the extra 2 rounds, with this fight being a main event, I think that does completely change how this fight is going to take place. Maia's going to have to maybe pace himself a little bit better. You saw Maia in a 5-round fight against Ryan LaFleur where he took him down for 4 straight rounds, was looking fine, but couldn't get the finish. And then in the 5th round, I mean, he was exhausted. He just kept flopping to his back, got repeatedly warned by the referee, even had a point taken away for passivity. So I definitely am thinking here that if Damian Maia does not get a finish in the first 3, maybe 4 rounds, that Carlos Condit's going to TKO him super late. So I know it's a little crazy because Condit is going to likely be very down on the cards at this point, but I do think that if anybody has that ability to pounce on an opponent that is dominating them, it's Carlos Condit. I mean, look at the Rory McDonald fight where McDonald was crushing him through about 2.5 rounds. And the second he had an opening, he just went after McDonald, hurt him badly, got on top, and then just unloaded punches and got a finish with just seconds remaining in the fight. So this is the type of guy that he is. There's no quit in him. And I think Carlos Condit's still really motivated. He knows that if he wins this fight, he could get a matchup against the winner of Woodley versus Wonderboy. So I think, I'm definitely concerned that Maia outgrapples him for 3 or 4 rounds and could win a decision. But I also think that with how much energy Maia expends and with him getting older every time we see him, I mean, he is in his late 30s now, that there could definitely be an opening very late in this fight for Carlos Condit to land that knockout blow. So I'm very, very slightly leaning Carlos Condit here. So that's going to be my pick. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC on Fox 21. Our premium bets for the event will be released this Friday following the weigh-ins, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes Sportsbook. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this week.